The moment I walked into the house, something felt horribly wrong. The silence was deafening. My heart raced as I scanned the rooms, and then I heard it, the faint sound of my daughter's cries, muffled, like they were coming from behind a closed door. The panic set in. I rushed down the hallway, each step heavier than the last, and there at the end was the closet door, slightly ajar, but just enough to lock my eyes on it. My breath caught in my throat. I knocked desperately, louder and louder, calling out her name, but the only response was her sobs growing weaker by the second. And then I saw her, Karen, the woman who had been tormenting my family for months. There she stood, arms crossed, watching from the corner of the room with that chilling, cold expression on her face. No sign of remorse, no hint of guilt, just a dead stare, as if she were watching a game unfold before her eyes. She wasn't concerned. She wasn't even moved. She was simply there, watching my daughter suffer. I felt helpless, the anger rising within me like a tidal wave, but I couldn't let it take over, not yet. I knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer from Karen. No help, just a sinister smile that spoke volumes. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. But why? What had brought her to this point? What dark motive was lurking behind her twisted actions? I had no idea this would be the day everything changed. The day I'd finally face the true extent of her cruelty. Karen had always been a problem, but today, she crossed a line that I never thought she would. I'd dealt with her countless times before, her passive-aggressive comments, her constant interference in our lives, and her blatant disregard for my disabled daughter. At first, I thought maybe she was just a difficult person to be around, someone who thrived on control. But as the weeks went by, I realized something darker was lurking beneath the surface. This wasn't just petty behavior, it was malicious. She didn't see us as human beings. We were just obstacles in her world, things she could manipulate, control, and push around as she pleased. It all started when we moved into this neighborhood. The HOA, the Homeowners Association, was supposed to be a group that kept the community peaceful and well-maintained, but it quickly became a breeding ground for power-hungry individuals like Karen. From the moment she laid eyes on me, she started to make demands. She didn't like how we kept our lawn, the color of our mailbox, or the way we parked our car. It didn't matter that my daughter's condition limited my ability to take care of everything the way she wanted. She expected perfection, and if we didn't meet her standards, we would face her wrath. I'll never forget the first time she publicly scolded me for parking my car too close to the sidewalk, even though it was perfectly legal. My daughter, who relies on a wheelchair to get around, was with me that day. I remember Karen's cold stare as she told me how inconsiderate I was being to the other neighbors. She had no idea what it was like to care for a child with disabilities, but she acted as if she was the ultimate authority. I tried to explain that it was difficult to park in such a narrow space with a wheelchair in tow, but Karen wasn't interested in hearing it. She just wanted to impose her will on everyone, and no amount of reasoning would change that. The next few weeks were filled with more of the same. Each interaction with Karen felt like walking on eggshells. She would show up at my door with a list of complaints, always finding something wrong with the way I lived. I knew she was making my life miserable on purpose, but I wasn't prepared for how far she would go. What started as little annoyances, passing comments, petty rules, soon turned into something much worse. I began to notice that she was targeting my daughter more and more. At first, it was subtle, snide remarks about the way she looked or the way I carried her things. But then, Karen began to get bolder. She started to accuse me of abusing the system by parking in spaces designated for the disabled, claiming I was taking up space from others who actually needed it. It made my blood boil. Here was a woman who didn't even understand the challenges my daughter faced, using her power in the neighborhood to make us feel like we didn't belong. The worst was yet to come. It wasn't long before Karen's tactics became more threatening. She began to meddle in our personal affairs, trying to get our family reported to social services for fabricated reasons. She even went as far as spreading rumors in the neighborhood, telling people that we were a bad influence and troublemakers. I felt cornered. I had never dealt with someone so intent on destroying my life. But nothing could prepare me for the moment when she locked my disabled daughter in that closet. Karen had been following us that day, watching from behind the shadows, lurking at every corner, waiting for her moment to strike. I should have known she was planning something. I just didn't realize how far she was willing to go. As I knocked on the door, hoping she would come out, I realized something terrifying. Karen had been planning this all along. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty. And this was just the beginning. I stood frozen in front of that closet door, my mind struggling to process what was happening. My daughter's muffled cries echoed from behind the thin wooden panel. The noise, distorted by the wood, was a mixture of fear and confusion, a sound I knew all too well, a sound that broke my heart every time I heard it. It was the kind of cry that every parent dreads, the kind that says, I don't know what's happening and I'm scared. Sweetheart, it's okay. I'm here. I'm right here. I shouted, pounding on the door with my fists. I wasn't sure what I thought would happen. If somehow my knocking would magically make the door swing open, but it didn't. The closet was locked tight, and with every second, the panic inside me grew. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the room itself were closing in on me. I could hear my daughter's voice, her words so faint that I could barely make them out. But it was enough to know she was still there, still alive. That was the one comforting thought I clung to. Mom, please, she begged, her voice a fragile whisper. My heart sank. I knocked again, louder this time. Open the door. Let her out. Karen, you have no right to do this. I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. I didn't care anymore if I sounded desperate or frantic. I was both. Every knock on the door sent a fresh wave of anger surging through me. This wasn't just an inconvenience or an argument. This was cruelty. Cold, calculated cruelty, and it was happening right in front of me. The sound of my daughter's sobs became more frantic, the desperation in her voice growing sharper. Please let me out. I'm scared. I don't want to be here. Her cries cut through me like a knife. It was all I could do not to collapse in that hallway, my body trembling from the weight of the situation. I was her mother, her protector, and here I was powerless to help her. I turned to Karen, who was standing a few feet away, leaning casually against the wall, as if this were some trivial inconvenience. Her arms were crossed, and a smirk tugged at the corners of her lips. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, watching as if she were observing a show. Her indifference to my daughter's suffering was maddening. Karen, open the door. Now. I shouted again, the sound of my voice echoing in the hallway. But she didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. The rage inside me built with every passing second. How could she do this? How could anyone be so heartless? My fists clenched as I looked down at the door handle. My mind raced, searching for a way to get inside. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I didn't care. All I could focus on was getting to my daughter, who was clearly in distress, and making sure she was okay. I rushed to the door and grabbed the handle, twisting it desperately. It was locked, of course. Karen had made sure of that. I pounded on the door again, my knuckles now raw and bruised. Please, Karen, you can't do this. You have no right. My voice wavered with a mix of pleading and anger. Still, Karen did nothing. She simply stood there, watching me as if this were some sick game. Her expression hadn't changed. The smirk remained on her face, a reflection of the twisted satisfaction she was clearly deriving from this. It was as if she enjoyed seeing me suffer, watching me struggle to reach my daughter. I could feel the sweat dripping down my face, my hands slick with fear and frustration. I slammed my shoulder into the door, hoping to break it down, but it held firm. Every time I tried to break through, I was met with resistance. The closet door might as well have been a wall of stone. Please, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. Please, Karen, let her out. This isn't a joke. For the first time, Karen spoke. Her voice was calm, too calm, and it made my blood run cold. She'll be fine, she said, her tone flat and dismissive. I'm sure she's just fine in there. It's not like she's in any real danger. I stared at her in disbelief. What are you talking about? She's a disabled child. She's trapped. You're hurting her. My voice cracked again, the weight of what she had done finally settling in my chest. How could anyone say such cold, heartless words? Karen didn't even flinch at my words. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering my outburst. It's her own fault for being so difficult, she said, as though it was a reasonable explanation. She's just getting what she deserves. I felt my stomach turn at her words. It was like she was talking about a pet, not a human being, my daughter. She was trying to justify her actions, and all I could do was stand there, in shock, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. This wasn't just a neighborly disagreement anymore. This was evil. I turned back to the door, my desperation reaching a boiling point. You have no idea what it's like to care for her, I shouted. You don't know what it's like to fight for your child every single day, to make sure they're safe, to make sure they have a future. And you're doing this. At that moment, I lost all control. The rage that had been building in me finally erupted, and I slammed my body against the door, hoping against hope that it would give way. But it didn't. The pain of the impact shot through me, but I barely registered it. All that mattered was my daughter, locked away, scared, and alone. Karen didn't even blink as I collapsed against the door, my tears mixing with the sweat on my face. She simply stood there, her cold, calculating eyes never leaving me. And in that moment, I realized something that sent a chill through my entire being. She wasn't just watching my daughter suffer. She was enjoying it. This wasn't the first time Karen had crossed a line. I should have known then that this was more than just a neighborly annoyance. Over the past few months, I had watched her push the limits, using her position in the Homeowners Association, HOA, to control and manipulate everyone in the neighborhood. But it wasn't until she targeted my daughter that I understood just how far she was willing to go. From the very beginning, Karen had made it clear that she was someone who believed she was above everyone else. When we first moved into the neighborhood, I was hopeful. It seemed like a nice, quiet place where we could finally settle down away from the chaos of the city. But that optimism quickly faded when Karen appeared at our doorstep with her perfectly pressed clothes and an air of superiority that was impossible to ignore. She was the self-appointed queen of the block. Everyone seemed to fear her, and I quickly realized that I wasn't exempt from her harsh judgments. The first few run-ins were minor, things I brushed off as the petty behavior of a control freak. She didn't like the color of our front door, told us our mailbox was too large for the neighborhood, and once even wrote me a letter about how the shrubs in our garden were too tall. I smiled, nodded, and moved on, not taking her seriously at first. But Karen's demands didn't stop there. She started showing up unannounced, walking around the property, inspecting every detail. It felt as though she was trying to assert power over us, to make sure we knew that she was in charge. Then came the incident that would change everything. My daughter, who has a physical disability, relies on a wheelchair to get around. She's the most loving and sweet child you could ever meet, but she struggles with the simplest things. One day, Karen stopped by while I was helping her into the car. My daughter was having a particularly hard time that day, and it took longer than usual. Karen, of course, had no patience for it. She approached us, her face twisted in annoyance. You know, she said, you really shouldn't be parking in that spot. It's reserved for people who need it more than you. My daughter's disability had nothing to do with Karen's world of perfect, judgmental eyes. I tried to explain calmly that my daughter's needs were no different from any other person who required accessibility. But Karen wasn't interested in hearing it. She turned on her heel and walked away, muttering under her breath. It wasn't the first time she had tried to belittle my daughter, but this was different. This time, it felt personal. That moment planted a seed in my mind, but I dismissed it as nothing more than a rude encounter. Little did I know, it was the beginning of a much darker plan. A few weeks later, Karen started making more direct threats. She would constantly make complaints to the HOA about the way we lived. She wrote formal letters, made phone calls, and even filed anonymous complaints about my lack of proper parking. She targeted every little detail, always making sure to call the city authorities, always going above and beyond to scrutinize our every move. But when it became clear that the HOA was unwilling to take any real action, Karen took matters into her own hands. The worst of it came one cold afternoon when I returned home to find a letter from Karen waiting in my mailbox. It wasn't just another petty complaint about the garden or the garage. This one felt different. This letter was laced with passive-aggressive remarks, but also it had a more sinister undertone. "I don't think you're fit to be a part of this community," it read. "It's clear you don't care about the rules or the other residents. Maybe it's time for you to consider moving." She made it clear that she wanted me out, that my family wasn't welcome here, and I knew then that it wasn't just about the rules. It was about power. She wanted to control us, to push us out of the place we called home. This is where the rising tension began. At first, it felt like small jabs from a miserable person with too much time on her hands. But as time passed, Karen's behavior grew bolder, and her cruelty escalated. The HOA, Karen wasn't just the overbearing neighbor anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who would stop at nothing to break us. And then came the night of the closet incident. Looking back, there were so many signs I had ignored. Her snide remarks about my daughter's disability, her increasingly harsh complaints, and the cold indifference she showed toward my family. Those were all small pieces of a larger puzzle. I never saw it coming, but Karen had been slowly building up to this moment, orchestrating a plan where my daughter would be nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game. Why did she do it? Why go this far? What had we done to provoke such a malicious act? At first, I wondered if it was just an isolated outburst, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the first time Karen had used her power to cause harm. This was part of a much larger vendetta, a pattern of cruelty, manipulation, and control. My family was the latest target in a long line of victims, and the sad part was, I had no idea what kind of sick satisfaction Karen was getting from all this. It wasn't just about the rules. It wasn't just about making our lives difficult. It was about making us suffer. As I stood in front of that locked closet, my fists pounding the door, I realized that Karen wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a threat. And now, she had crossed a line that would force me to do whatever it took to protect my daughter. The seconds felt like hours as I stood there, trembling with a mix of fear, rage, and desperation. Every fiber of my being was screaming to act, to do something, anything, to get my daughter out of that closet. The knocking was no longer enough. I couldn't just stand there and wait for Karen's approval to open the door. This was beyond that. This was about saving my daughter, and no one was going to stop me. I slammed my fist against the door one more time, feeling the sting in my knuckles as it would seem to mock me with its unyielding resistance. "Karen," I shouted, my voice hoarse with emotion, "you're going to regret this. Open the door right now. I'm done asking." But Karen didn't budge. She just stood there, leaning against the wall, with that cold, almost amused expression on her face. I could see the slight smirk tugging at the corners of her lips as she watched me unravel. The indifference she exuded was like a slap in the face, a reminder of just how little she cared about the pain she was causing. She wasn't just watching this, she was enjoying it. Every scream from my daughter seemed to fuel her twisted pleasure, and that thought made my blood run cold. The air between us was thick with tension, and I realized in that moment that I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her think for 1 second that she had any control over me, over my family. This had gone too far. I wasn't just protecting my daughter now, I was fighting for her dignity, her safety, and my right to stand up to someone who had been nothing but cruel. In a split second, my body took over. The anger that had been boiling inside me for months, the frustration of dealing with her, the helplessness of watching her torment my family, exploded. Without thinking, I turned away from the door and charged toward the window at the far end of the hallway. The window. Of course. It was the only way to get to my daughter in time. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I didn't care that it was a ridiculous plan. My daughter was in there, terrified, and I had to get to her. The window frame was old and flimsy, and I knew it would be risky, but I didn't have a choice. I ripped open the curtain, my hands shaking as I scrambled to remove the window screen. The metal edges scraped against my fingers as I pried it off with everything I had, the sound of it tearing filling the silence of the house. I didn't know if Karen was watching me or if she was simply waiting for the chaos to play out, but in that moment, all that mattered was getting inside. The window opened with a creak, and I climbed through as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I landed inside with a heavy thud, and for a split second, I lost my balance, stumbling forward. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not now. I rushed to the closet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I swung the door open with all my strength. My daughter was huddled inside, her body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. She looked up at me, relief flooding her face when she saw me standing there, but I could see the terror still in her eyes. The damage had been done. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close, trying to reassure her that it was over, that she was safe. And then I heard it. "You should have stayed out of it, you know." Karen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. I turned to face her, my arms protectively wrapped around my daughter, but Karen didn't seem fazed. She was still standing in the doorway, watching us with that same cold, calculating expression. I took a step toward her, fury igniting in my chest. "Stay out of what? What the hell is wrong with you? You locked my daughter in that closet. What kind of person does that?" My voice was shaking, but it was no longer with fear. It was pure, unbridled anger. Karen stepped forward, her lips curling into a smile that made my skin crawl. "I did what needed to be done. She's a burden on this community. A drain. She should know her place." My heart stopped. The words she said weren't just cruel, they were venomous. They weren't just about me, they were about my daughter, about her very existence. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about a bad neighbor. This was about someone who saw herself as above everyone else, someone who thought she had the right to decide who deserved compassion and who didn't. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But as much as I wanted to scream at her, as much as I wanted to lash out with all the rage that had built up over months of her cruelty, I knew I couldn't. I had to think. That's when the unexpected happened. Someone from the neighborhood, someone who had been witnessing this entire situation unfold, stepped forward. It was Mr. Matthews, an elderly man who lived 2 houses down. I had barely ever spoken to him before, but here he was, standing at the top of the stairs, watching Karen with a look of disgust. "Karen, that's enough," Mr. Matthews said, his voice steady but firm. "I've seen enough of your games. This is not how we behave in this neighborhood. You don't get to treat people like this anymore." Karen's eyes flickered with shock, then annoyance. "You have no idea what you're talking about, old man." But Mr. Matthews didn't back down. "No, Karen, you've pushed this too far. You've hurt people for the last time." Karen's face twisted with rage, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned on her heel, storming out of the room with a final contemptuous glance. The power that had once radiated from her now seemed to crumble under the weight of Mr. Matthews' words. I stood there, holding my daughter in my arms, trying to process what had just happened. The anger inside me was still burning, but now there was a flicker of something else. Relief. It wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had a chance. I wasn't alone in this fight. The climax wasn't just about confronting Karen. It was about finding the strength to stand up, to fight back, and to know that there were people who would support me in this battle. It was a moment of victory, yes, but also one of realization. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And Karen was going to have to face the consequences for her actions. In the days that followed the confrontation with Karen, everything seemed to change, yet nothing truly felt settled. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, exhaustion, anger, and a profound sense of disbelief. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel like we had won. My daughter was safe. That was the most important thing. But even in that safety, there was a gnawing feeling in the back of my mind, an unease that told me the war wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first thing I did after Karen stormed off was call the authorities. I didn't know if they could do anything, but I had to make sure that Karen's actions were documented. The officer who arrived seemed sympathetic, but there wasn't much he could do in the moment. Unless there's direct evidence of criminal activity, like physical harm, it's hard to take legal action, he explained. You could file a formal complaint with the HOA, but I can't guarantee any immediate consequences. It was a cold, harsh reality. Despite Karen's clear cruelty, the legal system didn't always prioritize something as intangible as emotional distress or the intentional suffering she inflicted on my daughter. The officer gave me a report suggesting I file a restraining order if things escalated further, but it felt hollow. How many times had we been told to just keep documentation before anything could be done? How many times had Karen gotten away with things just because the rules didn't seem to apply to her? The HOA, on the other hand, finally seemed to take notice. Karen's reign of terror had always been backed by her status in the community, but after Mr. Matthews spoke out and the police were called, other neighbors started coming forward with their own stories. It was like a dam breaking, whispers and rumors about Karen's past behavior began to surface, and suddenly, she wasn't just the untouchable figurehead of the HOA. She was a pariah. I spoke to a few of the neighbors who had witnessed Karen's treatment of us, and many expressed regret for not standing up sooner. Some had quietly suffered under her reign, just as we had, but they had been too afraid to speak up. A few residents said they had noticed odd behaviors, like Karen making decisions about who could and couldn't park where or how people should manage their homes. Decisions that weren't hers to make, but ones she enforced through subtle threats and manipulation. For me, it was bittersweet. The satisfaction of knowing Karen was finally being held accountable didn't erase the damage she had caused. It didn't undo the hurt she had inflicted on my daughter or the months of stress and anxiety I had endured. My daughter's fear from that day still haunted me, her trembling voice, her wide eyes, the way she clung to me as though she thought I might disappear. At night, when she thought I was asleep, I could hear her whispering to herself, her words broken and soft. Why did she do that to me? Why did she want to hurt me? The sadness in her voice broke my heart. I couldn't answer those questions, and I hated that I couldn't protect her from the pain Karen had caused. I hated that this woman had the power to make my daughter feel unsafe in her own home. And I hated that even though Karen had been confronted, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt more like survival. As much as I wanted to feel victorious, as if we had somehow defeated Karen, I knew the truth. Karen wasn't the kind of person who would just let go of her power. She had made it clear that she wasn't done with us. That sense of anger and entitlement ran deep within her, and I had no doubt she would continue to find ways to manipulate the situation in her favor. In the days following the confrontation, Karen's actions became more subtle but no less dangerous. She started using her position in the HOA to undermine my efforts, spreading rumors about my family's character, questioning my parenting, and subtly turning neighbors against us. The HOA board members, once too afraid to challenge her, were now forced to confront the reality of her behavior. They removed her from her position as president of the HOA, but that only emboldened her. Now, she was a disgraced woman with nothing to lose, and that made her more dangerous than ever. I realized then that this wasn't going to end with a single confrontation. Karen wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. And as much as I wanted to believe she'd learned her lesson, deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. She would continue to haunt our lives, lurking in the background, waiting for the next chance to strike. And so, life continued, but with a new tension in the air. The house didn't feel like the safe haven it once was. My daughter still had nightmares about that closet, about being locked away and left alone in the dark. She had made incredible progress since then, but it was clear that the trauma would linger like an invisible weight pressing down on her. I did everything I could to reassure her, to remind her that she was safe now, but the truth was that neither of us would ever be the same after that day. As for Karen, I knew I hadn't seen the last of her. There was still a cold, calculating determination in her eyes when she looked at me, like she was waiting for the right moment to strike again. But this time, things would be different. I wouldn't back down. I couldn't. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight not just for my daughter, but for myself. And I knew that no matter what Karen tried to do, I wasn't going to let her break us. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Karen faded into the background, like a shadow that never fully disappeared. She wasn't gone. No, she was still around, lurking, trying to find new ways to make our lives difficult. But every time she tried, every time she pushed, I found a little more strength. I found my voice, and I found allies in the community who weren't afraid to stand up to her. For now, things were calm. But I knew the battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And one thing was certain: Karen would have to answer for her cruelty one way or another. The resolution wasn't complete. It was just a temporary lull in the storm. But in that quiet, there was a promise. I wouldn't rest until the injustice was undone. And one day, I would make sure Karen understood the true cost of her actions. As I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I'm reminded of how far we've come and how much further we still have to go. What Karen did to my daughter, the pain she caused, will never be forgotten. But it's not just about that day. It's about the years of silent suffering, the moments of fear that my daughter faced, things no one should ever have to endure. Karen thought she could break us, but what she didn't understand is that the strength of a family is unshakable. Every time she tried to tear us down, we only grew stronger. And though this chapter may be closed, the story isn't over. The road ahead will be long, and I know there will be more challenges, more battles with people like her. But what I do know without a doubt is that we will face them head on together. And I'll always fight for my family no matter what. But here's the thing: I'm not doing this alone. I have all of you, my supporters, standing by me every step of the way. Your strength, your encouragement, it fuels me. So, if you believe no one should ever have to suffer the way we did, if you believe in fighting for what's right, hit that subscribe button. This fight is far from over, and I won't stop. I'm standing up for my family, and I know you will stand with me. Don't miss what's coming next. The next chapter is just beginning, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Subscribe now, and let's make sure we never let anyone like Karen have the power to hurt others again.